let's get started with some good news. Okay, so mostly good news. There's some kind of questionable news and maybe a few bad news issues, but we'll get started with something positive. The fact is, the good news is, folks, everybody wants to buy a house. Okay, everybody needs to have a house. Outside of people that are homeless, unfortunately, everybody wants a roof over their head. And one of the best ways in which you can build equity for your future and your foundation for yourself and your family is by buying a house. So you don't have to spend a lot of time convincing anybody. You work in sales, yes, but the idea of having to sit there and convince somebody that buying a house is a good idea isn't much of a challenge. They know it. In fact, this quote goes through it. It says, survey after survey finds that the vast majority of Americans see home ownership as a preferred lifestyle choice, a crucial part of obtaining the American dream, and a requirement for membership in the middle class. Everybody gets it. In fact, even if you ask renters, over 90% of renters, 93% of the renters see a variety of positive advantages in buying a house, okay? So on the demand side, it's pretty easy. Okay, so the question is, why? When to buy a house, and so forth. And that varies for everybody. But the bottom line is, people want to buy a house. If nothing else, you can always show someone this if they say, well, buying a house isn't that great, or I like renting. Okay, folks, NAR works with, every year puts this out through their economists, and it shows the median net worth of home owners versus renters. And in the United States, homeowners are typically net worth at about $400,000. Renters are about $10,000. Not even close. The old adage is the best time to buy a house was yesterday. The second best time to buy a house was 15 years ago, okay? So the longer people wait before they want to make that transition and jump into buying a house, they're actually taking a step backwards financially. The quicker they buy a house, the better they're going to be off financially. Okay, so what's the real estate market look like for next year? Well, first, let's talk about the economy, because quite frankly, the economy is the foundation which kind of drives people's ability to buy homes. It's hard to buy a house if you don't have a job. So it's a little hard to see, so let me walk you through this. This shows the gross domestic product growth of America, and it also shows us compared to Canada, England, France, Japan, and Germany. And I think that's it. Oh, and Italy's on there as well. Clearly coming through 2017, 2018, everybody was slowly moving up from an economic standpoint. COVID hits in 2020. Everybody drops across the world. And then since that time, you can see where the separations occurred. And at the top, it's the United States. Since the bottom trough of COVID, the U.S. has outperformed pretty much every industrial nation in the world for the last 5 or 6 years. And that's fantastic. We should all be, proud of that as a country. Job growth has been tremendous. Again, coming through COVID, we saw job losses. Coming out of COVID, we saw a huge spike in 21 and 22. And that's continued. We've gone for over 3 years of positive job growth in this country every single month for over 3 years, which is impressive. Unemployment rate goes up and down historically, as you can see this. Typically, what's considered full employment is around 5%, 6%. We are right now around 4.5% nationally. We had a spike, obviously, with COVID, but since that time, it's dropped precipitously, and it continues to stay relatively low. Has it gone up a little bit? Yeah, we're talking about 1/2 to 1/3 of a percentage point over the last few years. But again, if 5% is considered full employment, then 4.5% is still fantastic. We can't really complain about that. Inflation. Obviously, inflation has been a big deal in our country, and for that matter, the entire world for the last several years. You see, obviously, coming into COVID, it was fairly low, everybody was under 4%. During COVID, it spiked, and it went up over 9, 10, 12% in some countries, and since then, it's precipitously dropped quite a bit. And for the most part, inflation is settling in between 2, 3.5% worldwide. How countries respond to inflation is always kind of interesting. I'm probably the oldest person in this room, and I remember the 1970s and 80s very vividly. And the fact is, from 1970 to 1982, inflation was between 6 and 13% every single year. Every year between 6 and 13%. We were at about 6+% for about 2 years, and we thought the sky was falling. We thought we were going to die. and yet we're still here. Part of how you deal with a lot of economic turmoil is just familiarity. I had a chance to travel to South America recently. I went to Buenos Aires in Argentina. If you know anything about Argentina, their economy is rocky, to say the least. They're dealing with 200% inflation last year and 150% inflation this year. And when I was going there, I'm thinking, what are people going to be like? Are there going to be, stores closed, austerity, poverty? What's it going to be like? I was stunned. The shopping mall was packed. I didn't see a closed store anywhere. Every restaurant was busy. Every bar had people in it. And I started asking why. I mean, aren't you guys dealing with all this economic turmoil? They kind of shrugged their shoulders and said, it's Argentina. We always deal with this. So part of how you deal with the economy is kind of an attitude issue. About 2/3 of our economy is driven off of consumption. And in some parts of the world, high inflation and economic turmoil is a way of life. They shrug their shoulders and they move on to the next day. But there's also some good news. Although we had our spike, the dark line represents inflation. The lighter blue line represents wage increases. And as you can see, the gap between the two was fairly strong for about 2 years, where inflation outstripped wage gains. But for the last 2 years, since the peak, it's actually flipped, and wage increases have exceeded inflation for the last couple of years. So that's good news. The fact is, the United States remains the leading economy in the world, and the International Monetary Fund is predicting that we will continue to be the economic driver worldwide going into 2025. Now, what does that mean for the Inland Empire? Because clearly that's all global stuff, but in the Inland Empire, you happen to be in the most dynamic economic region in the state of California and one of the most economic dominant areas in the country right now. This shows a bar graph of Inland Empire job growth from 2015 to 2019, and it compares it to other regions in California. We killed it. We absolutely dominated statewide. And since COVID, 2019 through 2023, again, the Inland Empire has created more jobs at a faster rate than any other part of California. And we continue to be that way. And we will for quite some time in the future. A combination of things. Yeah, just economic growth, the warehousing, the housing, and just people. This is just a place to come. And a lot of it has to do with the housing prices of the urban areas on the coastal counties. I'll get to that in a minute. In fact, they're forecasting the Inland Empire is going to grow twice as fast as the rest of Southern California for the next 25 years. This is the place to be if you want to work. Okay. So the prediction, this is from The Economist. It's considered a conservative publication. Headline, America's economy enters 2025 in great shape. The second line, which you probably can't read, said, politics will not spoil it, but Donald Trump's agenda presents some, serious risks. So what does that mean? Okay. Well, the fact is there is a new sheriff back in town. He left for 4 years, and with that, he kind of ran on some interesting economic platform. Now, keep in mind, investment follows certainty. You have instability in markets, instability in housing, instability in interest rates. People have a tendency to pull back and act conservatively, okay? So stability is really something that United States provides a lot of investors from a global standpoint. But our new president doesn't like stability in a lot of ways. He likes kind of chaos. He thrives off of it. He loves stirring things up, not only from a media standpoint, but from a policy standpoint. I had a chance last week to participate and listen to a presentation by a Morgan Stanley economist, and they kind of outlined from their perspective some of the key policy things that were discussed on the campaign that may or may not come into fruition in 25, 26, and so forth during the next White House administration. They looked at 4 or 5 different things. So immigration on the red side, tariffs on the red side, and then fiscal austerity. And on the plus side, from the Morgan Stanley standpoint, were tax cuts and deregulation. Okay, I'm not going to spend time on tax cuts and deregulation. I'm going to kind of look at immigration, tariffs, and government austerity, which means government cuts, eliminating departments and cutting spending at the federal government side. So that has some red flags from the Morgan Stanley people. And investment internationally, like, well, what does this really mean? How far are we going to go? And what does it mean for the economy? So one of the things is he said, we're going to deport millions of people. Okay, maybe we'll see, I guess. It's going to be a challenge to do that. Number one, we don't really have a system set up to deport 10 or 11 or 12 million people. Typically, in any given year, we deport about 1 million people a year, depending on, who's president. It doesn't really matter. It's about 1 million people a year get deported. But to do 8, 10, 15 million, that's something that we've never done, at least at that scale. And obviously that has a lot of cost associated with it. Not the least of which is, what does that mean? Because as you well know, most migrants have jobs and are contributing to the economy. So if you look at where are migrants working from an industry standpoint, the two industries that dominate employment for migrants is construction and agriculture. Now, if you were to take millions of construction workers out of the already tight labor market, what does that mean? That's a challenge. That's something that we really haven't thought through, and it'll be an issue for our economy, not the least of which is on the agriculture side, another issue. You cannot take migrant farm workers out of the equation and not have that have an impact for people buying groceries and so on and so forth. So we'll see what happens on the immigration side and how that all unfolds. If I were to bet, I suspect there'll be a lot of enthusiasm in the very beginning, a lot of talk, a lot of hype, and they'll probably target certain individuals they want to deport, people, for example, with criminal backgrounds, so on and so forth. But if I had to bet, I'd say we're not going to see 10 million people deported in the next 4 years. It just doesn't financially make a lot of sense. We'll see. And you're already seeing people say, wait a minute, wait, hold off on the deportation. The Texas housing industry put out a formal statement saying, you know what, maybe not deport everybody. We need labor to build homes, because right now Texas is in a building construction mode, and people are starting to realize that there are repercussions. That sword cuts both ways. As far as tariffs go, and he made a big announcement last night, a lot of talk about tariffs, and, most economists don't like them. There are some that think it might have some benefits. I'm not going to sit here and play judge one way or the other. It is going to be interesting because he's probably the most aggressive president in the last 100 years to talk about implementing tariffs, and not just with China. I mean, last night's statement he made was the taxes and the tariffs would be against Mexico and Canada, which are our second and third largest trading partners, and actually combined are much bigger than China. So we'll see what happens there, see how that unfolds with the economy. The last issue really has to do with what you're hearing is this Department of Government Efficiency. And Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are kind of heading this whole thing up about cutting trillions of dollars out of the federal government. This is another one to keep your eye on. I don't really know what it's going to look like and how it's going to unfold, but you can just imagine laying off, hundreds of thousands of federal employees. It's going to have a ripple effect in the economy. So just real quickly, if you look at how the federal government spends the money, although this is a few years old, it hasn't changed substantially from a pie chart standpoint, the federal government spends about $7 trillion a year. Now, the blue represents mandatory spending, which means it's basically already committed. Things like Social Security and Medicare. Those are budgetary items that are already committed through laws, through legislation. Then you've got net interest, which means the debt payments you have on it. You've got to make those payments. About 22 to 23% of the $7 trillion is discretionary money, which means budget that you can actually say, okay, we're going to cut that. Okay, that changes every year. But if you look at how that discretionary money is broken out, the vast majority of it is our military budget. So now you're getting that smaller and smaller pie, because they're not going to probably cut much out of military. They're just not. Maybe a little, but not substantially. Then you've got a lot of small little agencies. But over here is the Department of Education. And that's one that's been targeted by a lot of people saying, do we really need to have a federal government Department of Education? I don't know. They do spend money, billions of it, about $100 billion a year through that agency. But if you close it and you stop all the funding, what does that mean? Well, this is a graph that shows states' Department of Education and how much money they receive as it relates to their budget. And if you look at this list, for red states, it's about 17% of their budget is backfilled with federal money. For blue states, it's about 11 to 12%. Okay? So the red states are much more dependent on that federal education subsidy. And we all know who won the last election. It's a red president. So will he go through and close that department down and cause all of these states to all of a sudden find themselves having massive budget cuts in their estates and their Department of Education? We'll see. These are all moving parts, and I think we're going to see some things be more successful than others. Some things they may start and then stop, but we'll find out. So where does that leave the American economy in 2025? Like I said, if I had to bet, I think there'll be a lot of enthusiasm the first year or two, particularly as the House and Senate are controlled by the Republicans, to do a lot of these changes. However, I don't think they're going to be quite as grand as being described. I think they'll be more measured. Our future president loves that kind of chaos. He loves turmoil. That's all true. But what he loves more is favorable ratings. I mean, the man is obsessed with getting good ratings. And having the economy go down, having interest rates go up, having inflation go up would not be good for ratings, not be good for his brand. So it may be smaller steps toward a lot of those goals as opposed to massive overhauls. Okay, so what does that mean for the real estate market? So this year, the market has been significantly better, in double digits better in a lot of ways than what we had last year. Admittedly, last year was a tough year, mainly because we just had very few transactions compared to where we have historically been. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But basically, we've seen new listings increase almost 17%, and the beauty of that is new listings will convert to closed listings, and that's how we get paid. Okay, closed listings are essential, but it always starts with new listings. And you can see the numbers are up across the board. Again, this is a month-by-month breakdown showing a percentage increase on new listings, pending, and closed listings. The last several months we've seen this year are pretty much double-digit increases year over year, every single month. And our forecast is it's going to be better next year. Median sales price has been stable, if not slowly going up. If you happen to be working with someone right now who's sitting on the fence saying, yeah, I'm going to wait to buy that house because values are going to go down, I think there's a bubble that's going to happen. No, I don't see it. No one's predicting it. So if they're waiting, they're probably just going to end up paying more money. Again, this is statewide. They were looking at the median sales price. Again, no one is predicting the values going down. They're probably going to go up again. They're going up this year. They're going to go up again a little bit next year. Not huge, but it's going to go up a little bit. This shows a breakdown in sales volume per city on a city-by-city basis. As you can see here, Riverside, Corona, Rancho Cucamonga, then Temecula, Marietta, Fontana kind of ran up the top 5 or 6 cities from a sales volume standpoint. Being here in Riverside, you're right here in the middle of all things. Moreno Valley's down there as well. So not surprising. Big cities actually have more homes and have more potential for home sales. But oddly enough, smaller cities can do really well. Hemet and Menifee are not that large as cities, but there's much more transactions in those newer communities. A lot of business going on down in that area. If you want to compare us to other regions, this shows a breakdown of 3 different cities in our area. This shows active listings as of yesterday. Riverside, Moreno Valley, Corona had 993 active listings in those 3 cities. Total population, 694,000. Compared to Orange County, Anaheim, Huntington Beach, Garden Grove, about the same population, 708,000 people, half the listings. I mean, the Orange County is dying right now if you looked at the number of transactions that are actually in active listings that are in that market. Now, the values are much higher, which is great, but the actual turnover of properties right now is getting smaller and smaller in Orange County and in some of the higher priced communities. We're in an area that shows turnover and a lot of activity. Pardon me?
Yeah,
On the Orange County stuff? Yeah, particularly in the beach areas. Yeah. The forecast for next year statewide, home sales last year were about 257,000. This year, the estimate was about 275. Next year, a little over 300,000. Not huge increases, but it is trending in the right direction. Historically, in California, you would see about 400 to 450,000 transactions every year. We're in the low 3s going into next year. So we're still far behind where we need to be, but at a minimum, we are going in the right direction. Okay, so what are some of the challenges next year and actually going forward? And there are several. Number one, it's expensive to buy a house. Now, some of that's relative because as much as it's expensive here, it's much more expensive in LA, Orange County, and San Diego. So we have been historically kind of an overflow for the coastal regions. I grew up in Anaheim, and I moved out here in the early 90s because housing was more affordable. I got married, I was having kids, and I needed to buy a house. And I would imagine in this room, there's probably a few of you that came out of LA, Orange County, because housing was just easier and lower cost. And the point of entry was at a point price for you to be able to make it work. Says in the late 60s, the value of the typical California home was more than 4 times the average household income. Today, it's worth more than 11 times what the average household earns. It's expensive, folks. And there's no easy answer or way to fix that except to build more homes and to build more diversity of homes. But it is still expensive, and we are spending more per capita on housing in California than they are in most states. Although it's balancing out a little bit, we're still spending more on housing. One of the challenges is back when COVID hit, keep the market going, they dropped interest rates down to 2.5%, 3%, and everybody loved it. The market took off. It exploded for a few years, and everybody was buying, everybody was refinancing, and about 70% of the homes mortgages in California are at about 4% or less. And now when rates jumped up to 7%, all of a sudden, no one wanted to leave their house. People were very comfortable with a 3% loan and did not want to give that up. That's starting to change. I mean, for the simple reasons that are life, people die, people change jobs, people move, people get divorces. So nonetheless, people are always going to have to sell and buy homes, but people are still holding on to those low interest rates because they're attractive. And when the alternative is 7%, they don't like it. So hopefully we'll see rates drop a little bit next year. This is a graph that just shows the number of housing units and permits that are pulled annually in California. The gold bar right here represents about 180,000 units, either multifamily or residential homes that should be built every year to meet our needs. We're not close to it. As you can see, the bar graph on the far right and that white area above it shows the gap between what is needed and what is not being built. And lastly, on this bar graph, the purple represents multifamily construction. The red represents single-family construction. And as you can see, they're building more as a percentage multifamily than they are single-family homes. The developers aren't even trying to keep up and build enough houses for our population, mainly because the values are so high. Only X amount of people that make X amount of dollars can afford to buy a house. So builders are just running the numbers saying, we're going to build at this pace because the housing can't be supported by the income levels. This is a breakdown of construction in California by type. The green represents 5 units or more. The red represents single-family construction, and the blue are accessory dwelling units. And as you can see, accessory dwelling units have really taken off the last 5 or 6 years, and they're going to continue to be a dominant role in housing in our country, and in California in particular, because we passed the law here. And right now, ADUs represent 20% of all new home construction in California. I mean, it's unreal what's taken place in the last few years with that. Another issue that's kind of interesting, it's a little hard to read, which is we've been building bigger homes in our country for the last 40 years. Now you think, well, who cares? Bigger homes are nicer, and they are. The problem is, and if you look at this graph, the green line represents 4-bedroom homes, which in 1980 represent just over 20%. That's now over 50%. 3-bedroom homes were over 60%, are now under 40%. And 2-bedroom homes are now, were and still flat, because they're not building those. And the reason why that matters is bigger homes are more expensive. And that means that the more expensive homes you build, it means where are the entry-level homes and product for younger people to buy. And that has been a constraint in our market. I mean, if you think about it for a second, if a builder was able to build 12, 13, 1,400 square foot homes in a subdivision and they were $400,000, would you be able to sell those? All day long. Those would be snapped up in a minute by anybody who could buy them. And that's what we don't have in our market right now, are small, affordable homes under construction pretty much anywhere. I mentioned labor shortages. They're estimating about 500,000, just in California, 500,000 construction laborers deficit right now. If there's massive deportations, that's going to go even higher and have more constraint on our already tight market. Right now, there are 30 renters for every home sale in the country. There are 37 cities right now in California that have more renters than homeowners. every year or 2 or 3, another city gets added to that list as renting becomes more of a dominant theme, not only in California, but across the country. And that's a problem. Not that renters are bad. I rented for a while. I'm sure most of you rented at some point in your life, but home ownership is better. It just is for a variety of reasons. So communities have to get creative and figure out ways in which they can figure out how to get more housing built and the diversity of housing to get people into the market to be able to move up. Right now, they're estimating about 7.2 million housing shortfall in the country. This is not just a California issue. This is a national issue because, quite frankly, most communities look at housing as a burden. And when you try to build homes, city council members are under pressure because housing means more people, which means more traffic, which means more pollution, and they don't want to deal with it. So they're kicking the can down the road by not building. Okay, so what's the good news going forward? Well, 2025 will have more transactions than 2024. That's good news for us. We want transactions. Home values will be steady, if not slightly increasing next year. So there's going to be, that is fairly solid. Mortgage rates are expected to decrease. They haven't gone down, but the Fed's probably going to start chipping away at interest rates, and we should see that start to come down next year. If you have clients that are waiting for 3% to come back, tell them that it's not going to happen. It will not happen. Is 5.5%, 6%? Yeah, it's probably going to come back sometime. Maybe not next year, but that's the direction of where it's going. And the IE will continue to lead California in growth. So you're actually in the best and most productive dynamic region right now from an economic standpoint. And the bottom line is, folks, everybody still wants to buy a house. We are still, and the Inland Empire is without question the best positioned region to be in from a housing standpoint, from a real estate sales standpoint. That's not going to change for probably the next 25 years. This is the place to be. I talked a lot and very fast. Any questions?
I would say
yes.
Wait.
No, go ahead.
So with all this information, what would be your angle for getting more clients or talking to your clients about this stuff?
I guess the question is, what is the pushback you're getting from people relative to buying? Are people saying they want to wait? Are people saying it's just too expensive? Are they concerned about the economy? I mean, what are the objections that you're dealing with from a buyer standpoint?
I would say the affordability is the biggest one.
Affordability. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, which is difficult. I mean, there's not a whole lot anybody can do about that. Now, if interest rates drop, it'll make it more affordable. If it's more affordable, what happens? More people want to buy a house, which is more pressure on values going back up. I suppose the pushback is the longer they wait, it's not going to change the situation. You can buy now, and if you can afford, and it might be tight, if you can afford, and I can remember buying my first house, I mean, it was beans and rice 5 days a week because I needed to make my mortgage payment, and it was that tight. But after time, I was able to refinance. I bought my first house in '94. Interest rates were about 7.5%. And lo and behold, years later, I was able to refinance. So get into the house now if you can. If rates drop, take advantage of it on a refinance. Don't let that be the obstacle. If you can, do it. Waiting is not in your best interest. Any other?
Like they fall off.
So realtors' numbers nationally have decreased. So it's been about a 5% decrease across the country. It's been about a 5 to 6% decrease in California. Every association, every local association, they're all down about 5 or 6%. They were last year. They were down this year. They're probably going to be down again next year. 4 or 5%.
It's IVAR alone.
About 5% for us. Yeah. 4,000.
All right.
A couple hundred. Yeah. Yeah. And everybody's that way. Some are a little higher than others. Pardon me?
Right.
We're a membership organization. I get it. And, selfishly, we want more members. But it's a challenge. I mean, the reality is about 40% of all realtors nationally don't do any business in a year. It's tough. It's a tough business. And if you're not doing business, the attrition rate's about 10%. So in any given year, every year, it's about 10% of the realtors don't come back to IVAR or any association. But you got new people coming in or people coming back into the business after a layoff. So Yeah, right now we're kind of in a downturn, but we had about an 8 or a 9 year increase every single year for almost a decade. So it's not the end of the world. Some would argue getting more people out of the business is not a bad thing.
What do you think the market will eventually come back? Okay.
I think we're dealing with some new norms to a large extent. I think inventory is going to be tight and limited, better out here than other areas. I mean, you've seen properties in Orange County. I mean, I grew up in an area of Anaheim that's not a nice area, and the homes in that neighborhood are $1 million. I mean, just unbelievable. Now, when I was not too long ago, when I imagined $1 million home, it wasn't the house I grew up in, not even close. I don't see. I think the years of getting 400,000 and 500,000 sales statewide are going to be gone for a while. I think 300 to 350 is the direction we're going to be going in. Fewer transactions at higher values. I think we're getting to the new norm. Yeah.
You keep talking about the housing alternatives, like we need more solutions with the inventory, like different sizes, affordable housing, all of this kind of stuff. Is there something that agents can be doing to walk their clients into that process, or can they work with policy in the cities, or what are those things that you're talking about?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, again, that's another one that's somewhat complicated. The pressure on cities is to not build housing at all. And if they do build housing, they want to build big, beautiful half-acre lots and 4,000 square foot homes, because that's easy. You can sell that to a community. The idea of building a 100-unit subdivision that are 1,200 square foot homes on 4,000 square foot lots, that is a politically difficult idea to sell. It's needed. That's the entry-level housing that is needed in our community. But most politicians look at that and say, I don't want to have that kind of housing in my community. It'll attract too many of those people. And you can fill in the blank on what that means, but I think you know. They don't like it. It's politically not a salient position for them to be in. So what do I suggest? Be community activists. If you happen to live in an area where there's a housing project going on and you see the sign out front that it's going through a planning review, find out what the planning commission date is. Go to the commission meeting. You're a citizen. You live in that community. Stand up at the microphone and say, you know what? I live in this community, and these 20 homes that are being built would be good. We need more housing. At a minimum, we just have to get more engaged and be positive on housing. I mean, I was a planning commissioner for years, and I was stunned. Every single housing project that came before the planning commission had opposition from the community. Every one of them. And the irony was, every single person that was against it lived in a house. It was okay for them to live in a house, but they didn't want any more built. And the other issue on that is you got to remember, building a house does not make a baby. I'm not a genius, but I pretty much know enough biology to know that building a house does not make a baby. Population is going to increase, and people will need a place to live. And by not building, it does not stop population growth. It's going to happen. So you better plan for it and plan accordingly.
I've noticed that they're doing like a lot of apartments and condos, all that.
Mostly apartments.
Right.
Yeah. Mainly because they're looking at the market and saying, okay, the average house in a new house is $750,000. How many people in this area can afford to buy that house? And they're kind of leaking it out. They're very slow to build. The other issue is most of the developers on the residential side now are large Fortune 500 publicly traded companies. We do not have local builders the way we used to 30, 40 years ago. Those companies are looking for the best rate of return, and which means if it's better for them to build in Texas or Colorado or Arizona, that's where money and resources are going to go. So they're not as high on California because the market can't sustain the cost of building homes. It's just too expensive. So build smaller, cheaper homes is about all they can do.
So good.
It's the way to go. It really is. Great. Anything else? Well, if that's it, one.
In Menifee, I'm seeing a huge surge of new builds rentals.
Yeah.
So you can't buy them. They're just communities that they're building to rent. Like, are you seeing growth in that area?
So yes, I think we're going to start seeing more and more of that, where it's an apartment project, but they're also doing an overlay of a condominium map at the same time.
These ones are like homes. That's what I'm building right now in Moreno Valley.
It's detached,
32 attached townhome.
correct,
For that flowing will rent.
but you have a condo map on them.
So we're gonna take us 6 months longer to do condo map. So we're hoping condemnation is with it.
Okay,
We can skip that part and then sell equity individually clearly.
correct. And you're going to see more and more of that. And one of the reasons why is, and you probably know this, Stephen, is construction defect litigation, particularly on attached product. What happens is when you buy new construction, consumers have a 10-year period to file a lawsuit against the builder for any deficient building issues. My mom bought a new house years ago, and I can remember in the 9th year of her purchase, every week she was getting letters from attorneys saying, is there anything wrong with your house? Because now the window's closing, and if you want to file a lawsuit, the time is now to do that. So builders are reluctant to do that. So they're basically renting a project for 9 or 10 years. They're getting past that 10-year period. Then they flip a switch and they sell them, and they can avoid the construction defect litigation clause.
So is that what they're potentially doing with those rentals?
Some of them are doing the rental one. Yes. So it's a combination. Do you plan on selling yours right away? Or
I hope to never sell them.
Yeah.
3 other partners.
Yep.
Everything by the attendant, yeah.
Yeah, it makes more sense waiting 10 years. All right.
Oh, I saw it.
Hey, if you can hold on to it, it's the way to go. Okay, well, without any other questions, I want to thank everybody today. And yes.
Like you're doing that 25-year look at growth. What are some unexpected opportunities that agents should look out for in the coming years or now? That you see that maybe aren't being explored in the field yet. Debate.
I would probably encourage everybody to look at communities that you may not have looked at in the past. San Bernardino is a good example. San Bernardino has a pretty high turnover of homeowners there, and a lot of rental properties. And a lot of the rental properties, people rent there for a while. They might be they might be a senior citizen who owns the house, or 2 or 3 in San Bernardino, and they want to sell those homes because now they're 75 years old. The renter trashed the property. They don't have the income to rehab it. So, there's little niche markets like that. Hemet, Menifee, San Jacinto are going to boom and continue to boom. You saw the numbers there. So some markets you may not be looking at are going to be pretty strong going forward. And some that are close by that you may not have liked, San Bernardino being one, you can make money there. I remember back in my day, I did a lot of business in San Bernardino. Okay. All right. Well, thank everybody for giving me the opportunity to be here today. If you have any questions, feel free to call me at the office, IVAR. And if you're not a member, you can still call. I'll do whatever I can to help you guys out. Thank you so much.